Hello, Dazzle. Thanks for coming and hanging out with me today. I am glad that you are here. Today, I want to talk about autism and how science currently understands its relationships with genetics. This is a complex topic, and because of that, I'm going to be keeping things at a really basic level. And that's firstly because fully delving into the topic is way outside the scope of this video, and also because it's really outside of my wheelhouse. I am not a genetics expert. I do understand genetics at a basic level and thought that I could offer some basic understanding, but I want you guys to understand that that's all this is the basics. So, the first thing to touch upon is the fact that what we know about the genetics of autism is complex. There's no clear or perfect answers at this point in time, which is why the research is still ongoing. Twin and family studies have provided evidence that autism is largely genetically determined. Yet, there's also research that suggests that the twinning process itself is an important risk factor in the development of autism, which has major implications for our interpretation of those twin studies. There's also plenty of research that now challenges the diagnostic criteria, if not the diagnosis of autism itself. There's plenty of research to show that many traits associated with autism may in fact be due to alexithymia, and that there may even be more than one type of autism. In most cases, it appears that autism is polygenetic, or that it has multiple genetic factors involved, with each factor likely contributing only a small amount of risk. There's also good evidence that autism is genetically heterogeneous, which means that there are multiple different alleles or possible variations of a gene that can generate the same presenting traits. And how all of these various presenting genes or alleles combined together will impact the overall presenting traits of autism, which is a likely factor for the variability that we see in the traits being presented in different individuals. And this means that there are numerous possible variations upon the numerous genes that could possibly affect autistic traits. And some of these variations are coding for the same traits as each other, while there are other variations that are coding for different traits or even traits that are non-autistic. In addition to that, there are other factors that are adding to this complexity. There is the influence of epigenetics, or the modification of gene expression without changing the DNA itself. Our body uses numerous factors to do that, one of these being myelination, to effectively turn on or off our genes. And this means that genes can be present in our DNA, but not expressed due to them being suppressed. There's also de novo mutations, which are genetic alterations that present for the first time in one family member as a result of a variant or a mutation in a germ cell, which is an egg or a sperm, from one of the parents. The role of environmental influence on expression is unclear, but is thought to have an impact on that epigenetic level. And this is based upon the numerous environmental factors highly correlated with the presentation of autistic traits. All of this makes it difficult to determine the exact cause of autism. It is important to understand that while we are discussing our understanding and the current clinical theory regarding the genetics of autism, that there has not been anything fully decided upon in the clinical arena. Again, this is why the research into the cause of autism is still ongoing. And different experts have differing opinions upon the same research. And that is why it's so easy to find literature that presents a multitude of different opinions and thoughts regarding this matter of how these two things are interrelated. And all of this makes the topic all the more confusing. So currently, autism is not classified as a genetic disorder. And the reason for that is because there is no gene or set of genes that, when they're present, always produces the traits associated with the autism diagnosis. Additionally, the current research suggests that such a gene or set of genes doesn't exist for autism. A meta analysis of 7 primary twin studies reported that the heritability estimates ranged from 64 to 93% of the time, rather than the 100% or very near 100% that would be expected from a genetic disorder. Additionally, the severity of the various traits in twins was different between the twins. And this means that in individuals who had identical DNA, autism did not present the same way. And this implies that there is much more impacting the presentation of autism traits than the person's DNA. However, all of that being said, as we learn more about genetics in general, we are beginning to realize that there is less black and white about these diseases and that there is much more going on than we previously understood. There are cases where individuals have been found to have genetic criteria present for a genetic disorder, but not meet the clinical diagnostic criteria for that disorder. A large reason that we have always believed that those who had the DNA always had the disorder is because we were only performing the DNA sequencing on those who were presenting symptoms for the disorder. But recently, there's been a rise of genetic testing and increasing availability for genetic testing. And individuals can do genetic testing at home for things like Ancestry.com. And all of this has made DNA information a lot more available. And we've seen a lot more DNA information available for individuals who don't have the diagnosis. So in the end, it may mean that there are far fewer diseases, or maybe even none, that fall under the label of actually being a genetic disorder the way we've previously defined them, and that maybe they all are just disorders that have a genetic predisposition. We're still trying to sort all of this out. And this doesn't mean that DNA does not play an important role in autism. What it means is that autism has a genetic predisposition rather than being a genetic disorder. The research clearly demonstrates that there are genes that are commonly present in individuals with autism. This suggests that epigenetics has a major role in autism. DNA myelination and epigenetic modification allows for both genetic and environmental factors to modulate or change a phenotype or an observational unit. There's research that demonstrates that this myelination changes are associated with autism. And as of yet, there's no indication what activates this myelination in autistic individuals. However, there are numerous environmental factors, those that are not related to DNA, that are correlated with an increased risk for autism, such as parental age, so the age of the parents at the time of conception. Asphyxia-related birth complications, so the baby having a lack of oxygen at the time of birth, preterm birth, being born too soon, maternal obesity, mom being overweight, gestational diabetes, having really high blood sugar while pregnant. Various medications being taken during pregnancy have been correlated with an increased risk of autism, and even viral infections have been. So it's important to also mention that in all of this, that autistic traits are often seen in individuals that don't meet the diagnostic criteria for autism. Genetic relatives of people with autism often show milder expression of traits characteristic for autism, often referred to as the broader autism phenotype, or BAP. And this suggests that there is a cumulative nature to autism rather than an all or nothing factor, meaning that a person can have autistic traits, and if mild or few, they can function within society without dysfunction, distress, or danger. But when those traits become numerous or severe, the individual begins to have difficulties functioning within society, presenting with distress, dysfunction, and danger, and meeting the level that meets diagnostic criteria. While many object to autism being included within the DSM-5, the preceding information goes a long way to explain why it has found its way included amongst the mental disorders. Like every other disorder within the DSM-5, the research for autism suggests that there is a genetic predisposition with significant environmental factors determining the presentation of the disorder, determining whether or not it will be present and its severity. While autism is also classified as a developmental disorder, this doesn't change the fact that it is more similar to the disorders of the DSM-5 than it is not. And there are many that focus on the idea that we are born with autism, while those with depression or anxiety develop this later in life. So yes, the research suggests that individuals are either born with autism or develop autism while very young. But as of yet, we cannot rule out developing autism while as an infant or toddler. Yet what these disorders all have in common is that the disorder is not guaranteed to be present based on DNA, but rather DNA is present, and then someone with that DNA experiences an environmental exposure that triggers the DNA, triggers something, and the two together combined to lead to the disorder. And it doesn't matter if that environmental exposure happens in utero or while still in the mother's womb or after a person is born. It's still the same on a genetic level. It still means that it is a predisposition rather than a genetic disorder as far as the cause and effect of things. The other thing that autism has in common with the other disorders within the DSM-5 is that the autism traits are found within the family members of those with autism despite not meeting the diagnostic criteria. And this is also true of the other DSM-5 disorders. And this is where this idea of being a little autistic and a little ADHD comes from. And it's because these disorders are considered a spectrum, as are all of the other disorders in the DSM-5, despite not being specifically labeled that in the DSM-5 itself. The current psychological understanding of all of the DSM-5 disorders is that if you look, it makes the most sense to look at the symptoms as a wheel, with each symptom being a spoke on the wheel with a varying degree of severity that can be rated. And so you can have some symptoms not present, and you can have some symptoms very severe. You can have some symptoms mild, each one on its own variation of severity. And this is what gives it that spectrum nature. And they all share that in common within the DSM-5. And as a final point, when we're discussing autism's place within the DSM-5, there is the undeniable link between autism spectrum disorders and schizophrenia spectrum disorders. Research suggests that 30% of those with autism also present with schizophrenic symptoms, including psychosis. And this is much higher than the general population, where only about 0.5% of people are schizophrenic. So the general population, only about 0.5% of people have schizophrenia, while about 30% of people with autism meet the diagnostic criteria for schizophrenia. That's a huge correlation. Efforts have been made to characterize the pattern of cognitive function in both disorders, and similarities have become apparent, such as deficits in abstract reasoning and more complex aspects of memory and language. And those negative symptoms that we associate with both autism and schizophrenia, the things that we consider to be absent or negative. So the ability for self-care, the ability to communicate, those kinds of things are present in both disorders. So, however, it is difficult to determine how much of this is due to the historical connections of the two disorders and the interconnected language that's used to describe them. So there's a lot to still parse out here, but it's important to understand that these two disorders are really interrelated. Well, that's about it for my rambling today, and I hope that this helps you understand a little bit more about the complexity of autism and genetics. Thanks for coming and spending some time with me. If you like the video, please click on the like button. It really does help. And until we talk again, you guys be sure to take care of yourselves. Bye.